Hello, everyone. Really nice to be here. My name is Deborah. I have a consultancy that works in games and impact called Games for Good. And I will chat to you a little bit first about what I think Games for Good means and also about inspiring our player base to take action. And I just have a few slides to go through, and then I'm going to welcome some lovely guests who are going to carry on the discussion with me. And hopefully you in the audience will also be asking some questions. So if you do have any, feel free to throw them in the chat. And our lovely hosts are going to relay those to us for the Q&A time. So over here, this slide is really kind of what sums up one of the projects that I'm working on with something called the Playing for the Planet Alliance, who you've heard from already. And there's an initiative that we have launched out of the Alliance called the Green Game Jam. And this is really the tagline, I suppose, for that initiative. And it's, you can read it there, but it says, let's empower our players to change their world through the games they know and love. And I think that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do when we're trying to inspire our players, because our reach is unprecedented in our industry. I think we're in a really, really privileged position to be the main form of entertainment now. And I think we have a chance, opportunity, responsibility even to try to reach people the same way that, books, music, or film do. And I think we are in a really unique position because we have two of the most valuable things that anybody can give or that anybody can have from somebody else. We have our players' trust and we have their time, and they give us their time because they trust us, and that can be a really, really powerful relationship, and that means we can really do something with it. And I think if we use that relationship and, if we take care of it and don't abuse that relationship, if we care for our players, then they can in turn care for our planet. And so this jam is a little bit different, this green jam, because rather than trying to prototype maybe an idea for a game that may or may not ever see the light of day, or if it does, it could be years from now, this jam is all about how we can make a difference now. So it's again about trying to use existing games, existing live titles or titles that are about to go live, so that we can reach people now through the things that they already know and love and trust. And this year, the theme for the jam was around conserving and restoring our forests and oceans. And a little bit about the practicalities of the jam. It's really all around, like I said, using your live games. You choose a game, and then you try to tweak that game and then empower your players. And usually it's within, a couple of days, but we give kind of a 3-month window where studios can align their own schedules and try to figure out what works best for them. And then the point is to empower your players and reach and teach them, in this case, about the conservation restoration of forests and oceans. And so here are some of the studios that took part this year. It actually started last year with just 11 mobile studios. So as you can see, the jam has grown and multiplied, not just by number of studios, but also by platform participating. So we had not just mobile, but also console, PC participating. We had our first AR title taking part this year as well. And in case some of those studios don't necessarily mean something to you, the titles that are actually taking part too, these are some of the most beloved games that are out there right now. So we're really, really excited and grateful that all of these amazing studios are taking part. And something that was new this year is called the Players' Choice Award. We do have, we had awards last year and this year mostly voted by the participants or by UNIP for the winners. But this year we added something called the Players' Choice, because in the end, it really is all about the players, and we want to get their voice engaged and find out, what they think is best and what is inspiring to them. And so we had, within a couple of days, we had like 100,000 votes on a slightly wonky website because it is still learning. So I think for next year, that's definitely something we're looking at expanding on and getting more of those community voices involved. And that's really, really exciting for us as well. And speaking of the game jam and some of the games that participated, maybe now's a good time to let Giorgia and Adrian join us, because Giorgia is from FGOL, which is a game studio based out of London, and they've been participating in the jam for 2 years running, and so probably have quite a few learnings to share. And I would also love to hear a little bit about, your implementation, what it took to make that happen, and maybe some things that you can share with others who are trying to do the same. And then we'll also hear from Adrian Dellecker from the Luc Hoffmann Institute, who joined us from the conservation side. And I think it's really interesting to have this discussion because we get to see sort of both parts of the conversation, trying to tackle this one problem and see where the gaps are. And yeah, like I said, anyone within the audience who also has questions, please do fire them to the chat. We'd love to, make this a round table conversation. But Giorgia, maybe let's start with you. Tell us a bit about FGOL and your participation in the jam and how that was for you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really honored to be here today. Yes, as you mentioned, Deborah, my name is Giorgia La Rocca and I work at Ubisoft Future Games of London. Our studio is based in London. We have been acquired by Ubisoft in 2013. In terms of going back to your question, Ubisoft as a whole joined in 2019 the Playing for the Planet Alliance. Our studio is a proud member of the Alliance, and we have actively embraced the Ubisoft sustainability commitment. As part of this commitment, you mentioned, our studio participated to the Green Game Jam in 2020. I'll talk a little bit about the activation, what were the results, what we did, and what are our plans for the future. So the Angry Shark, we are the studio behind the Angry Shark brand and licensing. We have the in-house production of Angry Shark World. So for 2020, Green Game, the team designed a brand new extinction Arctic level and an extinction mode, which aimed to shine a light on the melting polar ice cap. In short, the players of the game are, sharks who act as the protector of their environment. The game is set obviously into a marine ecosystem, and for natural reasons, there is an easy connection between eco-sustainability, the well-being of the sharks and the marine ecosystem. So in the game update related to the jam, we wanted to show the effect of the climate change, and our players were effectively able to refreeze the melting ice. Since 2015, we have been partnering with Oceana, and in 2020, Oceana was effectively the partner of the extinction mode. So through the partnership and through this collaboration with Oceana, effectively our players have been directly engaged and directly had access to the Oceana branding. So that helped connecting our players with NGOs such as is Oceana. What we did in game was, basically we included ads, videos that had the Oceana sponsorship. We additionally included in-game interstitials that promoted the Oceana actions plus our in-game pack. And we provided social and source support and implementation in regards of the update. A bit of numbers. I'll try and be quick in numbers, but I think it's important to give a bit of context about the results and how effectively well-performing was this action that we made through the game jam. The rewarded boost were used in 60% of the extinction loops during the Oceana activation versus the usual 45% seen in previous months. So we've seen an increase. We had an increased numbers of players and total loops played during the time of the activation, which naturally suggests that more players played during the limited amount of time that we run the Oceania activation. The click-through rate on the interstitial, so the in-game ads that we run during the campaign, was 35%, which is above the usual metric. So that's what we did in 2020. You mentioned that there was the player choice, and effectively we made it number 2 as player choice. We will be participating to the 2021 edition, and we've already presented a pitch that will involve, the conservation. The update will be aimed at the restoration and conservation of our oceans. And so there is a specific focus on the coral reef.
Lovely. No, super interesting, I think, as well, just to like to see that engagement metric go up or see click-through rates go up, because I think sometimes, studios might be hesitant to try to include some of this content in their games because they're also worried about, what will be the player reaction? Is retention going to go up or down, etc. And I think when we can show those stats that you mentioned, that no, players are really hungry for this kind of content, it makes them engage more, they stay in the game longer. I think that's also just a really good business case. So thanks for sharing some of that as well. And I think it's interesting too that you mentioned, the interstitials. So there are so many different touch points within a game where you can actually reach your player base. So whether it's through the actual in-game content, whether it's through the story, through a live ops event, through ads or interstitials, I think it just goes to show that you can do like a little piece, or you can do all pieces, and everything is worth something. So that's really good to see. And yes, second on the player's choice. So well done, well done to you as well. And I see Adrian has joined us in our group. Nice to see you. And yeah, would love to hear a bit about the other side. As someone who's been working in the conservation space for a long time, and have now probably had lots of conversations with different people within the games industry. What do you see as the main sort of opportunity or potential within this space?
Thanks very much for having me. Yeah, I've been in conservation for over 12 years, and it can be quite depressing, actually. I mean, there's a major crisis. We see a lot about climate. It's getting very anxious out there. There's a lot of angst at what the future might be like. And the Luc Hoffmann Institute is particularly active also in biodiversity, which is, a little bit lower on the radar, but is also just as alarming. I mean, we've lost almost 2/3 of species over the past 50 years. There's a million more at risk. There's a massive conservation gap, meaning that there's just not enough money going into the sector. So if you're in this space, it can get depressing quite quickly. Games are interesting for a number of reasons, but the first one I would say is that there's this global aspect, and environment is a global issue. Climate, doesn't care about borders, and games have this intrinsic sort of ability to not only go beyond geographies, but also across genders. So it's really across demographics, this appeal, sort of human appeal, I think, about playing games. There's also this notion of clear goals and mission, and it's a way of sort of looking at it in a more optimistic way, and in a way that empowers much more. So players are involved, they feel like they're a part of it, and that can be a problem in the conservation sector. From my perspective, is that people might feel overwhelmed by these problems, feel like they're just a cog, and it's the problems are just way beyond them. So games really, I think, from that perspective, offer really a very interesting potential to create more empowerment. Then there's a very pragmatic issue. I talked about the conservation gap. There is revenue also that's of interest. So it's quite a massive market. You've said it's the primary channel for entertainment. It is, beyond books and movies combined across geography. So it's really an interesting market to look at for conservation.
No, definitely. And have you seen examples of things, within games where you've thought, oh, they're really doing a good job? Or because I think sometimes as well, there's maybe a hesitation from the game side about, you know, is this actually making a difference? How do we measure that it's making a difference? And I think Giorgia gave some great stats around, you know, retention, engagement, which are really important for games, but also on, you know, coming from the environmental side, like what are some behaviors or actions that signal to you that that there's change happening, or that the players are actually understanding, digesting, and then doing something with it? What do you look for?
So at the Luc Hoffmann Institute, we're an incubator for projects. What we've been looking at recently is the power of gamification for conservation, but with a very specific lens around revenue. Now that might make me seem very limited in scope, but obviously you're not going to raise revenue without awareness, or at least an audience, a marketplace. So, but this notion of revenue is really important, and I liked George's also presentation because it was very business-like, and that's sometimes what we miss in the conservation sector. And what we've been looking at is how can games offer new business models for conservation, and that means going beyond charitable giving, and that's super important. And I would also I would emphasize the fact that the idea here is not to create a massively popular game, make some profit, and then devote some of that to conservation, which obviously is great. I mean, I'm not complaining if that happens, but the idea is really how do you link that spending back to conservation in a much more direct way. So we're looking really at business models that raise revenue for the underlying asset, so that actually can give value to conservation, give value to wildlife, give value to natural habitats in a way that's not happening now. The only real way that happens is tourism. So somebody goes and flies over to another continent to see specific animals because there's appeal. They're spending money there. So the interesting thing is what are people really willing to pay? And games are really interesting because they might. It's an assumption, because actually I haven't come across really a massive success, but I think there's really promising initiatives out there that might get there. But what are people willing to pay for that underlying asset, to speak in business terms, of natural habitats and wildlife? And games offer a really, really interesting way to look at that.
Yeah, definitely. And just a reminder as well to the audience, if you have cues, please feel free to throw them into the chat. And oh, I was about to say, let's have Giorgia come back as well. It'd be great to hear from you. You know, what has been the process like of trying to implement some of this? Like, what were some of the challenges that you faced as well? Whether it's, I mean, there are so many things to consider. Well, I think it's great that everybody, like, I think every studio can do something and everybody can try. But it's not necessarily easy, right? You have to find a partner to work with it. If it is something around donations, for example, how do you vet that partner? How do you decide who to work with? Who's going to be the best partner for your title, your community? How do you make sure that your community of players like resonates with the type of campaign that you're putting into your game? Do you have any sort of things that you might have learned, especially doing the jam, you know, a couple years running, that you thought might be useful for other people who are doing it for the first time?
Absolutely. Well, I can give a quick example because I think for us it was always important to make sure that we had that we were listening to our audience. So in 2020, we also ran a survey which was targeted to our audience. Adrian said, like, my part is very business led, but it's actually like sometimes it really helps. So I'm happy that that's kind of helping in this instance. So we run this survey targeting our active audience, and we asked questions like, in your mind, what is the Angry Shark brand? Or various, like, would you recommend the Angry Shark to your game to your friends? So to the question, when we asked, like, what is for you Angry Shark, over 50% of participants answered a mobile game brand. Obviously, no surprise, absolutely fair, just it is what it is. But what is absolutely amazing is that almost 30% of participants answered a conservation brand of marine life and sharks, which was amazing because we are not, but our players feels that we are trying to do something with every little help. So the actions that we're effectively doing, like big or small, like participating to the jam, or even just run an interstitial with an Oceana petition to be signed, or there are like little things that we can do. And yes, it's true, the audience follows so much the brand and they are so passionate about the games that our passion, the passion that we put in our game, is effectively contagious, and is the actions that we want to take, they are passed to our players. So I think that that's absolutely important.
Wow. Oh, that's super interesting. That 30% said it was, they identified it as a conservation brand. Was there anything that, your players might have fed back to you, or anything that you learned where you thought, okay, we're not going to do that again, or we have to pivot here, or that didn't work so well, we're going to tweak it for next time?
We're gonna look at run more surveys in the future, like, just to understand better, because we know that our audience really likes the game and they're very connected. Our target audience is very young, because our primary audience is between 8 and 13, and our secondary is between 18 and 25 years old. So we have like a good range, and I think it's important for us to ask them what they want us to do or what they would like us to do, and effectively kind of listen to them and return the favor. Like, our players are effectively the most important things we have, so it's really mandatory that we listen. We're trying to do that more and more, but in reality, no one has asked any specific like, oh guys, do this. We've done actions like, people have asked about creating a shark that was based on their kids' draw, and we did that effectively. We're trying to expand more on these fun activities. So when we talk about more serious topics like the eco-sustainability, or like, the survival of the marine ecosystem, we effectively are listened, because we have an active relationship with our players.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important, just for players to feel like, yeah, they're heard, and they're investing all of this this time into your game that they love. So it makes sense that they would also have an opinion and a buy-in into it. And there is a question from the audience, and maybe Adrian, you can speak to this one a bit more. It says, I would like to hear more about games as a way of changing environmental behaviors. Is there anything in particular that you think games would be like very good at when it comes to changing behaviors, or is it just awareness overall, or do you think there is like an area within behavior that games might be really well suited to try to tackle?
Yeah, so first off, there's gamification and games, and gamification I think has clear behavioral impacts. Whether those persist long term once that is withdrawn is sort of an open question. We haven't studied that long enough. As far as games themselves are concerned, yes, I mean, awareness is important. I would say that games have a big role to play in education, but it has to be subtle, almost like product placement. I'm a little bit skeptical of sort of games that are overtly green. Then you're really kind of you might be improving and facilitating an existing system, but you're still ultimately appealing to that to that same audience, which is already kind of converted. Now, there's a lot of merit to that, because old channels to try and capitalize on that goodwill are not really very innovative. So games really offer a really interesting place to modernize that, but ultimately it won't sort of dramatically expand. So, but in terms of behavioral change, there's definitely things that can be done in terms of managing resources, et cetera. I mean, a lot of games, strategy games, et cetera, are really about managing resources in different ways. So if that can be linked to the real world in a very intuitive way, then players can just more intuitively grasp the relationship to nature, the fundamental relationship between the materials and the environment. But I'd repeat, I would stay away from sort of really overtly green games and choose more subtle placements.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And there's another question from the audience, which is an interesting one, because as much as I think a lot of us, like you said, preaching to the convert a little bit, I think most people who are either, joining these panels or watching, we're sort of like, we believe there's something here, right? Whereas there are a lot of people that I still talk to who say like games are just like, they're meant to be for fun, they're entertainment. It's not a place to bring some of these like heavier subjects. You're going to like alienate your players, or players are looking for escape when they come to games. Like you don't need to be kind of, trying to mess with that experience, etc. So I guess, what would you say to the question of like, can games really do everything? Entertain, connect audiences to nature, inspire to lead more sustainable lives, generate income for conservation, and I know what my answer is, for example, but I would love to hear from the both of you.
I mean, I'm representing, I suppose, the conservation sector, which might not be unanimous, but I'm obviously a little bit converted as well. But I've got two young daughters. I mean, what do they do at school? They play games to learn, and it's part of human nature. So there's an awful lot that can be done. If it's not everything, it's a lot that can be done in terms of education, character, even sort of, if you want to go there, sort of moral fibers, etc. A lot of it is learned through games at a very, very early stage. So I wouldn't advocate all games play that role, but clearly games can play an absolutely massive role in humanity's relationship to nature. Yes.
Giorgia?
I agree, like totally agree. There is a big chunk of well, eventually it's a global thing. People plays game. We know that people engage with games and the brand. They follow us on social media channels. They interact with us. They want to speak to the developers of the games, and they are interested effectively about what the game developers do. So either is that trying to improve the situation of the marine ecosystem, or partnering with with a marine sustainability brand, NGO, or whatever else it is. People might or might not listen, but again, you also have the direct approach to a young audience very often, and that is very important because it's an easy way to talk to them. It's a serious topic, 100%. It's something that we should all learn and do more actively, 100%. But it's easy. It's an easy way to talk to people of any age. And I think we should all try and do like even a little. And, every little help, bit by bit, we might do a big thing together.
Love it. It's great. Well, we only have a minute left, so maybe some closing thoughts from both of you about potentially, what's still missing in bringing these two sides together, or in making this relationship better, stronger.
Well, we're trying to launch this thing called Wildlife Venture Lab, where we're exploring really just that nexus of games, gamification, and environment. So, and specifically for conservation. So we can continue the conversation there if anybody's interested, very much. But we didn't talk about kind of the role of corporations, for example. It's not necessarily, no matter how big it is, 160 billion. The conservation gap I was referring to is estimated at 800 plus billion. So, it's not just individual players paying $10 a month that's necessarily going to change. It's a whole ecosystem. It is education. It is that, and it is also corporates realizing that they can't possibly be successful if they don't have all of those people on boards, and maybe that's through games.
That's great. And Giorgia?
I think the most is communicating. Start communications with NGOs, talk more, start these conversations early on, find people that we share common goals, and try and reach them. Different industries, but same goal. We might have ideas that others haven't thought about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, both of you. Really great conversation, and thanks to everybody who asked questions as well in the audience. And yeah, we'll throw it back to the host.